He was a respected man, engaged to the perfect woman and owner of an empire that seemed unshakable. But everything collapsed the moment he saw his future wife yelling at a hungry girl in the garden. And it was by protecting that unknown child that he finally found the true meaning of love and purpose. If you were touched by this beautiful story of resilience and love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Continuing. From his corner office on the 42nd floor, Blake Thorne surveyed the Manhattan skyline with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had built half of it. At 45, he was one of New York's most successful real estate developers, his name emblazoned across luxury buildings that punctuated the city's famous silhouette. Thorne Enterprises had transformed from a modest family construction business into a billion-dollar empire under his leadership, and New York's elite spoke his name with a mixture of envy and respect. "Mr. Thorne?" His assistant Jennifer's voice came through the intercom. "So your fiancée is here." Blake smiled, straightening his custom-tailored suit jacket. "Send her in, please." The door opened to reveal Victoria Caldwell, elegant in a cream designer dress, her blonde hair arranged in a perfect chignon. The daughter of a banking magnate and a former debutante, Victoria moved with the practiced grace of someone born into privilege. Their engagement had been featured in every society page in the city, the union of two of New York's most prominent families. "Darling." She kissed his cheek, careful not to smudge her lipstick. The wedding planner called. "She needs final approval on the floral arrangements for the reception. I've selected peonies and white orchids, $12,000 per centerpiece, but they'll be exquisite with the Swarovski crystal vases." Blake nodded absently, his mind still on the development project he'd been reviewing. "Whatever you think is best, Victoria, and the guest list has reached 600. I had to invite the Whitmores. Daddy insists they're crucial for that merger he's working on." She perched on the edge of his desk, her diamond engagement ring catching the light. "Oh, and I've decided on the Hamptons house for our summer retreat. The one with the infinity pool and private beach access. 14 million, but it's a bargain considering the location." 14 million? Blake raised an eyebrow. "I thought we agreed on something more reasonable." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "Reasonable doesn't make a statement, Blake. When you're married to me, everything needs to be exceptional." She checked her watch, a Patek Philippe that had been his engagement gift to her. "I have lunch with the charity committee at Le Bernardin. We're planning the annual gala. You'll donate $1 million as usual, won't you? It's for children or animals or something equally photogenic." Something in her tone caused Blake to look up from his papers. "You don't know what cause your own charity supports?" Victoria laughed, the sound practiced and hollow. "Darling, no one actually cares about the cause. It's about being seen at the right tables with the right people wearing the right clothes." She stood, smoothing her dress. "I'll see you at home later. Don't forget we have dinner with the Astors at 8. Wear the Armani, the navy one. It photographs better for social media." After she left, Blake turned back to the window, a faint unease settling over him. Was Victoria always this superficial? Had he simply not noticed before? They had been together for 2 years, their relationship a seamless integration of social appearances and business advantages. Their wedding, scheduled for next month at the Plaza, would be the society event of the year. His phone buzzed with a message from Robert Weiss, his chief financial officer and oldest friend. "Emergency meeting cancelled." Matthews pulled out of the deal. "Let's regroup tomorrow." Blake sighed. The Matthews acquisition had been in the works for months. This would require damage control, but at least he could head home early for once. Perhaps he could use the unexpected free time to actually relax, something he'd almost forgotten how to do. The drive from Manhattan to his estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, took longer than usual due to traffic on the Merritt Parkway. Blake's Bentley rolled through the imposing iron gates of his property at just past 4 o'clock. The 10-acre estate, with its Georgian-style mansion and meticulously landscaped gardens, represented the culmination of his professional success. Instead of pulling up to the main entrance where Henderson, his butler, would be waiting, Blake directed his driver to the service entrance at the east wing. "I'll let myself in, James. Take the rest of the day off." "Very good." "Mr. Thorne, thank you, sir." Blake had purchased this estate 5 years ago, a reward to himself after his company went public. The renovation had cost nearly as much as the property itself, with no expense spared on imported marble, antique fixtures, and state-of-the-art technology hidden behind classic architecture. Victoria had redecorated twice since moving in 8 months ago, each time with increasingly extravagant tastes. As Blake approached the side entrance, he heard raised voices coming from the direction of the rose garden, Victoria's pride and joy, though she'd never planted a single bloom herself. Curiosity drew him around the corner of the house, where a scene unfolded that would forever alter the course of his life. Victoria stood in her designer dress, now paired with gardening gloves she clearly had never used before, her face contorted with rage. Before her, trembling and small, stood a child, a little girl no more than 7 or 8 years old. The girl's clothes were dirty and worn, her dark hair tangled and her thin face streaked with tears. In her hands was half a sandwich, clearly taken from the garden party setup that the staff had been preparing. "You filthy little thief!" Victoria's voice dripped with disgust. "How dare you trespass on private property? Do you have any idea how much these roses cost? More than your entire worthless existence, I'd wager." The little girl's voice was barely audible. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was just hungry." "Hungry?" Victoria scoffed. "That's not my problem. You people are always looking for handouts. My fiancé works for his money. He doesn't steal it." "I didn't steal nothing but food," the girl whispered, her accent revealing traces of a Spanish-speaking background. "I can work. I can help in the garden. Please don't call the police." Victoria laughed, the sound cutting and cruel. "Work? What could you possibly offer? Look at you. Dirty, uneducated, probably illegal. You're nothing but a burden on society. People like you are why we need better security in this neighborhood." "Henderson," she called toward the house. "Call the police immediately. We have an intruder." Blake stood frozen, unable to process the venom in Victoria's voice. This was a side of her he had never witnessed, or perhaps had chosen not to see. The little girl's eyes widened with fear, and she began backing away, still clutching the sandwich as if it were a lifeline. "Please," she begged. "I'll go. I won't come back." "Oh, you certainly won't," Victoria sneered. "You'll be in juvenile detention where street rats like you belong." Something snapped inside Blake. Before he could consider the implications, he stepped forward, making his presence known. "Victoria, that's enough." His fiancée whirled around, momentarily startled, before her face rearranged into a practiced smile. "Blake, you're home early. Don't worry, I've handled this situation. This little thief broke into our property and—" "I heard everything." Blake's voice was quiet but firm. He moved past Victoria toward the child, who flinched as he approached. He crouched down to her eye level, careful to maintain a non-threatening distance. "Are you okay?" The girl nodded hesitantly, her large brown eyes watching him with wary confusion. Victoria's voice rose an octave. "Blake, what are you doing?" "She's trespassing. She could be carrying diseases for all we know." Blake ignored her, focusing on the child. "What's your name?" "Esperanza," the girl whispered. "But most people call me Hope." "Hope," Blake repeated softly. It seemed fitting for this moment that felt like a crossroads. He gestured to the sandwich she still clutched. "Go ahead and eat. You must be hungry." Victoria stormed over, her designer heels sinking slightly into the manicured lawn. "Have you lost your mind? You're encouraging this behavior. What next? Shall we invite all the homeless of New York to picnic on our grounds?" Blake stood slowly, turning to face the woman he had planned to marry. In that moment, it was as if he were truly seeing her for the first time, not the carefully curated image she projected, but the person beneath. What he saw chilled him to the bone. "Hope," he said without taking his eyes off Victoria, "there's a kitchen through that door. Mrs. Sullivan, our cook, is a kind woman. Tell her I sent you and that you need something to eat." The girl looked between them, sensing the tension, before slowly backing toward the indicated door. "This is outrageous," Victoria hissed once Hope was out of earshot. "I'm calling security." Blake caught her wrist as she reached for her phone. "No, you're not." "Excuse me?" Victoria yanked her arm away, her eyes narrowing. "Since when do you care about street urchins? This is about our safety, our property." "This is about basic human decency," Blake replied, his voice steady, despite the storm brewing inside him. "She's a hungry child, Victoria, not a security threat." Victoria stared at him as if he'd sprouted a second head. I don't recognize you right now. Blake looked toward the house where Hope had disappeared into the kitchen. Funny, he said quietly. I was just thinking exactly the same thing about you. The evening stretched into an excruciating performance. Victoria, ever the consummate socialite, had recovered her composure quickly enough to insist they still attend dinner with the Astors. We can't cancel, she'd declared, already calling her stylist for an emergency touch-up. Richard Astor is considering investing in your Hudson Yards project. Besides, everyone who matters will be there. Blake had acquiesced, mechanically donning the Navy Armani as instructed, while his mind remained in the rose garden with the trembling child. Before leaving, he'd checked on Hope in the kitchen, where Mrs. Sullivan had given her a proper meal and cleaned her up as best she could. Blake had instructed Henderson to prepare the guest room and ensure the girl was comfortable until he returned. What will happen to me? Hope had asked, her voice small but her eyes direct. You'll be safe tonight, Blake had promised. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow. Now, seated at an elegant table at Daniel's, surrounded by Manhattan's elite, Blake felt like he was watching himself from a distance. Victoria laughed at appropriate intervals, her hand possessively on his arm, while he nodded at conversations about stock portfolios, summer plans in the Hamptons, and the latest society scandals. Blake, darling? Victoria's voice cut through his thoughts. Richard was asking about the zoning changes for commercial properties in Soho. You know, for his new retail venture. Blake forced himself back to the present. Of course, the city council is voting next week, but I have good relationships with 3 key members. I don't foresee any issues. Richard Astor, silver-haired and patrician, nodded approvingly. That's what I like about you, Thorne. You know how to make things happen. It's all about relationships, Blake replied automatically, the words feeling hollow in his mouth. Was this all his life amounted to? Leveraging connections to accumulate more wealth and power. The image of Hope's frightened face flashed in his mind, contrasting sharply with the obscene opulence surrounding him. $400 bottles of wine, $10,000 watches, conversations about third homes, while a child had been desperate enough to risk trespassing for a simple sandwich. Victoria squeezed his arm, her nails digging in slightly. Blake is being modest. He practically owns half the zoning board. Not true, Blake said firmly, pulling his arm away. I simply present compelling development plans that benefit the city. Victoria's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Well, you certainly know how to persuade people to see things your way. She turned to Margaret Astor. Speaking of persuasion, I finally convinced Blake that we need the Hamptons property. You know the Whitman estate? The one with the private beach access? Oh, that's a magnificent property, Margaret exclaimed. Though I heard the Aldridges were also interested. They were, Victoria preened, until I reminded the realtor of Blake's considerable influence in the co-op board, where Mrs. Aldridge has been dying to get an apartment. Amazing how quickly they withdrew their offer. Blake stared at his fiancée, a cold realization washing over him. You blackmailed them. Victoria laughed lightly, though her eyes flashed a warning. Don't be dramatic, darling. I simply leveraged our position, just as you do in business every day. That's not the same, Blake said, aware of the Astors watching their exchange with interest. Victoria placed her hand on his again, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was clearly meant to be heard. Forgive him, he's been working too hard. We're actually thinking of taking a sabbatical after the wedding, perhaps a month in Bali. We've discussed no such thing, Blake said flatly. An awkward silence fell over the table. Richard Astor cleared his throat. The Dover Soul is excellent tonight. The remainder of the dinner passed in a blur of forced small talk. Blake found himself studying Victoria, as if seeing her for the first time. The calculated way she dropped names, the subtle manipulations, the veiled insults disguised as compliments. Had she always been this way? Had he simply been too absorbed in his own ambitions to notice? On the drive back to Greenwich, Victoria unleashed her fury. What was that performance about? You embarrassed me in front of the Astors. I embarrassed you? Blake laughed incredulously. You bragged about manipulating the Aldridges out of a house they wanted. So, that's how the world works, Blake. You know that better than anyone. She examined her manicure with studied casualness. Now, about that street urchin. I assume you've called social services by now? Her name is Hope, Blake said quietly. And no, I haven't. Victoria's head snapped up. Why not? She can't stay with us. She needed a safe place to sleep. I'm going to talk to her tomorrow, find out her situation. Her situation? Victoria scoffed. She's obviously some illegal immigrant's child. Probably sent to steal. She was hungry, Blake interrupted. And you treated her like she was less than human. Don't be melodramatic. I treated her like what she is, a trespasser. Victoria sighed as if explaining something to a child. This is why we have security systems and staff to handle these matters. You don't personally get involved with the help or the riffraff. That's not how people like us operate. People like us, Blake repeated. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with implication. And who exactly are we, Victoria? She rolled her eyes. The successful ones, the ones who matter, the ones who make the rules rather than follow them. She turned to face him fully. Why are you suddenly playing at being Mother Teresa? It's not an attractive look on you. Blake stared out at the passing streetlights, memories flashing through his mind. His own childhood had been comfortable but not lavish. His father a hard-working contractor who had built their family business from nothing. His mother a teacher who had instilled in him a respect for education and hard work. When had he crossed the invisible line from successful to entitled? When had accumulating wealth become not just a goal but an identity? I'm not playing at anything, he finally said. I'm just questioning when we decided that treating a hungry child with basic dignity became something radical. Victoria stared at him. You've been behaving strangely ever since I found that girl. What's really going on here, Blake? What's going on is that I saw something today I can't unsee. He met her gaze directly. I saw exactly who you are when you thought no one who matters was watching. The car pulled through the gates of their estate. Victoria's voice turned cold. And what exactly did you see? Someone I don't want to marry. The words hung between them, unexpected even to Blake himself. Victoria's face froze, then cycled rapidly through shock, hurt, and finally calculation. You don't mean that, she said, her voice softening as she reached for his hand. You're tired, stressed about the Matthews deal falling through? Once that girl is gone tomorrow, everything will go back to normal. Blake gently but firmly removed his hand from hers. That's the problem, Victoria. I don't want to go back to normal. Inside the house, Henderson informed them that Hope had been given a bath, clean clothes, and was now asleep in the East Wing guest room. Victoria disappeared upstairs without another word, the tight set of her shoulders the only indication of her fury. Blake found himself walking to the guest room, easing the door open quietly. In the soft glow of the nightlight, Hope looked even smaller, swallowed up by the king-sized bed with its Egyptian cotton sheets. Her face in sleep had lost its wariness, revealing the child beneath the survival instincts. Someone had brushed her dark hair, which now fanned across the pillow. Mrs. Sullivan had apparently found an old T-shirt for her to sleep in, one of Blake's, humorously oversized on her tiny frame. He noticed a small, worn backpack placed carefully on the chair beside the bed, presumably containing all her worldly possessions. The sight of it tightened something in his chest. Who was this child? Where had she come from? Why was she alone? Blake quietly closed the door and headed to his study, ignoring the light visible under the master bedroom door, where Victoria was undoubtedly fuming. He poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and sank into his leather chair. Staring unseeingly at the shelves of leather-bound first editions, he'd acquired more for show than for reading. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. I hope you'll have regained your senses by morning. We have the charity brunch at 11. The Vanderbilts will be there. Blake put the phone down without responding and took a long sip of bourbon, feeling its warmth spread through his chest. Tomorrow he would need to make decisions about Hope, about Victoria, about the person he had become and the person he wanted to be. For tonight, he sat in the quiet of his study, a successful man by every external measure, yet feeling like the foundation of his life had been revealed as nothing more than an elaborate house of cards, ready to collapse with the slightest breath of truth. Outside his window, the lights of distant Manhattan glittered like the promise of wealth that had driven him for so long. But for the first time in years, Blake Thorne found himself looking inward instead of toward the next acquisition, the next deal, the next rung on a ladder that suddenly seemed to be leaning against the wrong wall. Hope. The name echoed in his mind as he finished his drink and prepared. to face the uncertain dawn of a day that would change everything. Blake woke earlier than usual, the first rays of sunlight barely filtering through the curtains of the guest room, where he had eventually fallen asleep. He hadn't been able to face sharing a bed with Victoria, not after what he had witnessed, not after the words they'd exchanged. He checked his watch, 6:15 a.m. The household wouldn't be stirring for at least another hour. He showered and dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, clothing he rarely wore anymore. His wardrobe had evolved to consist primarily of custom suits and formal attire, the uniform of the world he inhabited. The soft cotton felt foreign against his skin, a reminder of a simpler version of himself he'd left behind. Quietly, he made his way to the kitchen, surprising Mrs. Sullivan, who was already preparing breakfast. "Mr. Thorne," she exclaimed, "I didn't expect to see you this early. Shall I make you some coffee?" "I'll make it myself, thank you," Blake said, moving toward the coffee machine. "How was Hope last night?" Mrs. Sullivan's expression softened. Poor little thing was exhausted. Ate like she hadn't seen a proper meal in weeks, which I suspect might be the case. She was very polite, though, kept saying thank you for everything. Even asked if she could help with the dishes. Blake nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Do you know anything more about her situation?" "Not much, sir. She didn't want to talk about it. Mentioned something about staying in a shelter in Stamford for a while, but said they were full now." Mrs. Sullivan hesitated. "Sir, if you don't mind my asking, what are your plans for the child?" It was a fair question, one Blake had been wrestling with all night. "I'm going to help her," he said simply. "Beyond that, I need more information." The sound of small footsteps interrupted their conversation. Hope appeared in the doorway, still wearing the oversized t-shirt, her hair mussed from sleep. She froze when she saw Blake, wariness returning to her eyes. "Good morning, Hope," he said gently. "Did you sleep well?" She nodded cautiously. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the bed. It was very soft." "You're welcome. Are you hungry?" Hope glanced at Mrs. Sullivan, who smiled encouragingly. "A little," she admitted. "Well, you're in luck. Mrs. Sullivan makes the best pancakes in Connecticut." The housekeeper beamed. "Coming right up." "With blueberries or chocolate chips?" Hope's eyes widened as if she couldn't believe she was being offered a choice. Could I have both?" "Just a few?" "You can have as many as you want," Blake assured her, pulling out a stool at the kitchen island. "Why don't you sit here while they're cooking? Would you like some orange juice?" As they shared breakfast in the kitchen, something Blake couldn't remember doing since he'd purchased the mansion, he gently tried to learn more about Hope. She was guarded at first, answering in monosyllables between bites of pancake. "How old are you, Hope?" "8. And where are your parents?" Her fork paused midway to her mouth. "Gone," she whispered. Blake nodded, not pressing. "Where were you staying before you came here?" "Different places. The shelter sometimes, but they got too full." She looked down at her plate. "Sometimes the park, or empty buildings." Blake felt a cold anger at a system that could leave an 8-year-old child to fend for herself. No other family. "Aunts or uncles?" "Grandparents?" Hope shook her head. "Mama didn't have family here. They're all in El Salvador." She pronounced it carefully, pride momentarily overcoming her caution. "That's where I was born. But we came here when I was little." "And what happened to your mother?" Blake asked softly. Hope's small face crumpled. "There was a fire in our apartment building. 6 months ago." Her voice became a whisper. "Mama didn't wake up." Blake closed his eyes briefly, pain washing over him. "I'm so sorry, Hope." "The social worker lady said I would go to a foster home," Hope continued. "But then she got sick, and the new lady had too many kids to help. They put me in the shelter, but then there wasn't room anymore." She looked up at Blake, her eyes suddenly fierce with dignity. "I'm not a bad person. I don't steal things, just food sometimes when I'm really hungry. And I always try to work to pay it back." "I know you're not bad," Blake said gently. "You're very brave." A noise from the doorway made them both look up. Victoria stood there in a silk robe, her face a mask of cold fury. "Well, isn't this cozy? Playing house with your little charity case?" Hope immediately hunched her shoulders, making herself smaller. Blake placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Hope, would you mind if Mrs. Sullivan shows you the garden? The real one, not just the rose section. We have a koi pond I think you might enjoy." Once they were alone, Victoria advanced into the kitchen like a storm cloud. I woke up alone, checked my phone to find you ignored my text, and now I discover you're having some domestic fantasy with a street urchin in our kitchen? Have you completely lost your mind? Her name is Hope, Blake said evenly. She's 8 years old. Her mother died in an apartment fire 6 months ago, and she's been homeless ever since because the system failed her. That's a tragic story, Victoria said, without a trace of sympathy. One that should be handled by the appropriate social services, not by you personally. The appropriate social services failed her already, Blake retorted. She's been sleeping in Parks, Victoria. Parks, an 8-year-old child. Victoria opened the refrigerator, extracting a bottled smoothie. And that's terrible, truly, but it's not our problem to solve. Call child services. Make a donation to a shelter if it makes you feel better. But she cannot stay here. Blake studied the woman he had planned to marry, trying to reconcile this cold, dismissive person with the woman he thought he knew. You really don't care, do you? This doesn't touch you at all. I care about appropriate boundaries, Victoria replied, her voice clipped. I care about not turning our home into a homeless shelter on a whim. I care about the fact that you're making life-altering decisions without consulting me, your fiancé. Blake leaned against the counter, suddenly tired. You're right about one thing. I should be discussing life-altering decisions with you. He took a deep breath. The wedding is off, Victoria. She stared at him, her smoothie forgotten. Excuse me? You heard me. I'm not marrying you. Victoria laughed, the sound brittle. Because of one fight? Because of one dirty little street kid who manipulated your guilt? Don't be ridiculous. This isn't about Hope, Blake said, though they both knew it wasn't entirely true. This is about us. About who we are together and who we're becoming. Yesterday opened my eyes to a side of you I can't ignore, and to a side of myself I'm not proud of. Victoria's expression hardened. So that's it? You're throwing away 2 years and a life we've built because you're having some sort of midlife crisis? I'm ending our engagement because I don't like the person I am when I'm with you, Blake said quietly. And I don't think you like the real me very much either. Just what I represent. Victoria set down her smoothie with deliberate calm. You'll regret this, Blake. When this charitable impulse passes, when you remember who you really are and what matters in our world, you'll regret it. She turned to leave, then paused. I expect you to make the appropriate calls to cancel the wedding, and I expect appropriate compensation for my emotional distress and public embarrassment. You'll get the ring back and whatever gifts I've given you, Blake said firmly. Nothing more. We'll see what my lawyers have to say about that. With a final icy glare, she swept from the room. Blake remained in the kitchen, the silence ringing in his ears. He should have felt regret, or at least uncertainty, but instead there was only relief, a sensation of having put down a heavy burden he hadn't realized he was carrying. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Meeting with the Williams Group at 10. Critical for the Hudson Yards project. Need you there. Blake texted back, something personal has come up. Can you handle it? I trust your judgment. It was the first time in years he had missed a crucial meeting for a personal matter. Robert's response was immediate. Everything okay? Of course I can handle it, but not like you to miss this. I'm fine, Blake replied. We'll explain later, thanks. When he looked up from his phone, Hope was standing in the doorway, uncertainty written across her face. Is the lady mad because of me? Blake crossed the room and knelt to her level. No, Hope. Victoria and I have been having problems for a while. This isn't because of you. Do I have to leave now? Her voice was small but resigned, as if she was accustomed to disappointment. No, Blake said firmly. You don't have to leave. In fact, I was hoping you might stay for a while, at least until we can figure out a good, permanent solution for you. Hope's eyes widened. Really? You'd let me stay here? I would. Would you like that? For the first time, a genuine smile transformed her face, revealing a missing front tooth. Yes, please. Blake felt something shift inside him, like tectonic plates realigning. Good, that's settled then. He stood up. Now, I need to make some calls, and then I thought perhaps we could go shopping. You need some clothes that actually fit you. I don't want to be trouble, Hope said quickly. You're not trouble, Blake assured her. Actually, you might be helping me more than I'm helping you. Hope looked confused by this, but she nodded solemnly. Okay, I can help. As Blake watched her follow Mrs. Sullivan back to the garden, a plan began forming in his mind. He needed to ensure Hope's legal status, find her proper schooling, maybe hire a trauma counselor. But beyond that, her situation had illuminated a larger issue. How many other children like Hope were falling through the cracks of a broken system? For the first time in years, Blake felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with property values or investment returns. Victoria was right about one thing. He was having an awakening of sorts. But it wasn't a crisis, it was clarity. Victoria departed from the mansion in a whirlwind of designer luggage and cold fury, leaving behind only her engagement ring, dramatically dropped into Blake's morning coffee, and a thinly veiled threat of legal action. Blake was surprised by how little her departure affected him, as if she had taken with her a fog that had clouded his judgment for too long. Hope watched the scene from the top of the stairs, her small face a mixture of relief and guilt. When the front door slammed with theatrical force, Blake looked up to find her observing him. "Is it really okay that I stay?" she asked hesitantly. "Absolutely," Blake assured her. "Now why don't we get ready for our shopping trip?" The expedition to the upscale shopping center in Greenwich proved educational for both of them. Hope was overwhelmed by the abundance of choices, while Blake was struck by how little he knew about children's needs. A kind salesperson at a department store took pity on them, helping select practical items: jeans, t-shirts, sweaters, pajamas, underwear, socks, and a pink winter coat that made Hope's eyes light up. "Are you sure it's not too expensive?" Hope whispered, when she thought the salesperson couldn't hear, breaking Blake's heart a little. "It's perfect," he assured her. "And you need it for winter." They added sneakers, rain boots, and a pair of glittery shoes that Hope couldn't stop admiring. When Blake suggested they pick out a few toys or books, Hope led him directly to the book section instead of the toy department. "You like to read?" he asked, surprised. Hope nodded. "Mama taught me in Spanish first, then English. We used to go to the library every Saturday." Her voice grew softer. "Before." Blake squeezed her shoulder gently. "Then let's get you a library card too. But for now, pick out as many books as you want." By the time they returned to the mansion laden with bags, Blake had made several important phone calls to his lawyer about temporary guardianship options, to a recommended child psychologist, and to the Greenwich Academy, an elite private school where he sat on the board of trustees. The next morning, Blake drove Hope to her appointment with Dr. Sarah Jensen, a child psychologist specializing in trauma and grief. He sat anxiously in the waiting room, reviewing emails on his phone but unable to focus. When Hope emerged from the session, her expression was thoughtful but calm. Dr. Jensen asked to speak with Blake privately. "Hope is a remarkably resilient child," she explained, "but she's experienced significant trauma and loss. She has attachment issues, understandably, and is afraid of being abandoned again." "What can I do to help her?" Blake asked. "Stability and consistency are crucial. Set up routines she can count on. Be patient with emotional outbursts or regression. They're normal responses to what she's been through, and—" Dr. Jensen hesitated. "I have to ask about your long-term intentions, Mr. Thorne. Hope is already forming an attachment to you. If you're only planning a temporary arrangement, we need to prepare her for that transition carefully." The question caught Blake off guard. He had been operating on instinct since finding Hope, focusing on her immediate needs rather than long-term plans. "I want what's best for her," he said finally. "Whatever that turns out to be." Back at the mansion, Blake showed Hope the room that would be hers permanently, not the formal guest room where she'd first stayed, but a smaller, cozier space that Mrs. Sullivan had helped prepare. They had painted the walls a soft yellow at Hope's shy request and added bookshelves for her growing collection. "This is really mine?" Hope asked, running her hand over the colorful bedspread. "For how long?" "For as long as you need it," Blake promised. That evening, as they sat in the kitchen eating Mrs. Sullivan's lasagna, Blake having decided that formal dining rooms were overrated, his phone rang. It was Robert Weiss, his CFO, calling for the third time that day. "I should take this," Blake apologized to Hope. "It's about work." "Blake, what the hell is going on?" Robert demanded when he answered. "You've missed 2 critical meetings. Victoria is telling everyone you've had some kind of breakdown, and there are rumors you've called off the wedding." "The rumors are true," Blake confirmed. "The wedding is off." "Jesus, Blake," Robert sounded genuinely concerned. "What happened?" And please tell me it has nothing to do with that street kid Victoria's been ranting about. Blake glanced at Hope, who was carefully cutting her lasagna into perfect squares. It has everything to do with Hope and nothing at all. Look, can you come by the house tomorrow morning? I'll explain everything. The next day, Robert arrived at the mansion, his Tesla crunching on the gravel driveway. Blake met him in the study, where Hope was curled up in an armchair reading one of her new books. Hope, this is my friend Robert, Blake introduced. Robert, this is Hope. Robert's expression was a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Hello, Hope. Hello, sir, Hope replied politely before returning to her book. Let's talk on the terrace, Blake suggested, leading Robert outside. Once they were seated with coffee, Blake recounted the events of the past few days. Robert listened without interrupting, his initial skepticism gradually giving way to understanding. So you've become a guardian to a homeless kid and broken up with Victoria because she was cruel to said kid, Robert summarized. I have to say, of all the midlife crises I've witnessed, this is one of the more unconventional ones. It's not a crisis, Rob, Blake said firmly. It's probably the most clarity I've had in years. Victoria showed me who she really is, who I was becoming by association. I didn't like what I saw. Robert sipped his coffee thoughtfully. I never much liked her myself, but I kept that opinion to myself. Why didn't you say something? Because you seemed happy, or at least satisfied with the arrangement. Your personal life, your choice? Robert set down his cup. But Blake, what's your plan here? You can't just adopt a random child off the street. Why not? Blake challenged. She needs a home. I have more than enough resources to provide one. Because there are laws, procedures. What if she has other family looking for her? What if her immigration status is complicated? Have you thought about the scrutiny this will bring to your life, to the company? Blake's jaw tightened. I'm handling the legal aspects. My lawyers are working on temporary guardianship while we investigate her situation fully, and frankly, I don't care about the scrutiny. Robert studied his friend of 20 years. You're serious about this? Completely. And the company? Thorn Enterprises can't run itself, Blake. I'm not abandoning the company, Blake assured him, but I am reevaluating my priorities, which brings me to something else I've been thinking about. He outlined his emerging idea for a foundation focused on homeless children and families, particularly those failed by existing systems. I want to use our resources and connections to make a real difference, not just write checks for galas where no one can remember the cause. Robert whistled low. That's ambitious and admirable, but it's a significant departure from our core business. It would be separate from Thorn Enterprises, Blake explained. A personal project, though I'd hope for your support. You always have my support, Robert said without hesitation. I'm just trying to understand where this sudden passion is coming from. Blake looked through the glass doors to where Hope sat reading, her small legs tucked beneath her. Maybe it was always there, just waiting for the right catalyst. Over the following weeks, Blake established a routine that revolved around Hope's needs while maintaining his business responsibilities. Mornings were for breakfast together and driving Hope to school, where she had been accepted at Greenwich Academy on a provisional basis. Afternoons often included therapy sessions, homework, and increasingly, visits to shelters and community centers as Blake researched the scope of the problem he wanted to address. The business world buzzed with gossip about the broken engagement and Blake's apparent adoption of a homeless child. Victoria had wasted no time in spreading her version of events, portraying herself as the victim of Blake's impulsive charity and questionable judgment. Most of their social circle sided with her. Invitations dried up, and former friends became coolly distant. Mr. Patterson cancelled his investment in the Miami project, Robert informed Blake one afternoon. Said he's concerned about the company's direction. Blake absorbed this without visible reaction. His loss. Find another investor. It's not just Patterson, Robert warned. There's a perception that you're distracted, unreliable. Because I'm not attending every cocktail party and charity gala. Because you've disrupted the status quo. Robert hesitated. Blake, I support what you're doing with Hope, but you need to consider the business implications. Blake leaned back in his chair. I've built Thorn Enterprises into a billion-dollar company. My personal life shouldn't affect its value or performance. But it does, Robert said simply. You know that better than anyone. In our world, perception is reality. That evening, Blake found Hope sitting on the window seat in her room, looking out at the gathering dusk. "Everything okay?" he asked, sitting beside her. "Cassidy said you're not really my dad," Hope said quietly. "She said you're just feeling sorry for me, and you'll send me away when you get tired of pretending." Blake felt a surge of anger toward the schoolmate who had hurt Hope, followed by a deeper concern that she might believe these words. "Hope, look at me," he said gently. "You're right that I'm not your dad, not biologically and not legally yet. But I'm not pretending, and I'm not going to send you away. Promise?" Her voice was small, vulnerable. "I promise." He wrapped an arm around her thin shoulders. "In fact, I've been thinking, if it's something you might want someday, I could try to adopt you, legally, make you part of my family permanently." Hope's eyes widened. "You'd want to do that?" "Very much," Blake said, surprised by how true the words felt. "But only if you wanted it too. And it would take time. There are lots of legal steps." Hope was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "Would I have to call you Dad?" Blake smiled. "You could call me whatever makes you comfortable." "Could I think about it?" she asked seriously. "Of course," Blake assured her. "There's no rush. We're figuring this out together day by day." Later that night, after Hope was asleep, Blake sat in his study reviewing the preliminary plans for his foundation. The scope had expanded as he'd learned more about the issues facing homeless children and families. It wasn't just about providing temporary shelter, but addressing the systemic problems: mental health support, legal assistance, education, job training for parents, affordable housing initiatives. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "My lawyer will be contacting you about the settlement. Final offer before we go public with everything. You might want to consider your precious company's stock price before you refuse." Blake deleted the message without responding. Let her do her worst. Some things were more important than stock prices or social standing. He looked at the foundation proposal again, the name at the top of the document catching his eye. The Esperanza Foundation. Hope. It was what both of them needed, in different ways but with equal measure of urgency. And somehow, against all odds and expectations, they had found it in each other. The autumn air had turned crisp by the time Blake received the first legal threat from Victoria's attorneys. The thick envelope arrived on embossed stationery from Harrington, Wade and Pierce, detailing allegations ranging from breach of promise to emotional distress. Victoria was demanding a settlement of $12 million, a figure Blake might once have paid simply to avoid the inconvenience of a public battle. $12 million, Robert whistled, reviewing the letter in Blake's study. That's ambitious, even for Victoria. Blake set the letter aside. She's not getting a penny beyond what was already hers. It'll get ugly, Robert warned. She has connections with every society columnist and gossip blogger in the city. Let her do her worst, Blake replied, his attention drawn to the window where Hope was playing in the garden with the puppy they had, adopted from a shelter 2 weeks earlier, a scruffy mixed breed, with one floppy ear that Hope had named Chance. The legal threats coincided with a more immediate challenge, Hope's first parent-teacher conference at Greenwich Academy. As Blake entered the imposing Gothic building, he felt conspicuously out of place among the traditional families. Though he served on the board, he had always related to the school as a benefactor, not as a parent navigating its social dynamics. Ms. Abernathy, Hope's teacher, greeted him with professional warmth. "Mr. Thorne, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." Blake lowered himself into a chair clearly designed for someone smaller. "How is Hope doing?" "Academically, she's working hard to catch up," Ms. Abernathy explained. "She's behind in mathematics and science, which is understandable given the disruption in her education. But her reading comprehension is actually above grade level, and her Spanish is native level fluent, which is an asset." Blake nodded. "We've been reading together every night, and she's been teaching me some Spanish." "That's wonderful," Ms. Abernathy smiled. "Socially, there have been some challenges." She hesitated. "Hope's background is different from many of our students. Some families here have been less than welcoming." "Less than welcoming," Blake repeated flatly. "You mean they're prejudiced?" "Some parents have expressed concerns," Ms. Abernathy acknowledged carefully, "about Hope's influence on their children." Her influence, Blake felt his temper rising. Hope is a kind, resilient child who has overcome more adversity than most of these people can imagine. If anything, their sheltered, entitled children could learn something valuable from her. Miss Abernathy's eyes widened slightly at his vehemence, but she nodded. I agree completely, Mr. Thorne. Hope has shown remarkable character and determination. I just wanted you to be aware of the social dynamics. I appreciate your candor, Blake said, making an effort to moderate his tone, and your support of Hope. If there's anything specific I can do to help her academically, please let me know. Driving home, Blake's mind churned with frustration. The same social circles that had once welcomed him were now closing ranks against Hope, a child whose only crime was being born without their privileges. The injustice of it burned in his chest, fueling his determination to proceed with the foundation. The Esperanza Foundation was taking shape rapidly. Blake had assembled a team of experts in child welfare, housing policy, immigration law, and non-profit management. He had committed an initial endowment of $50 million from his personal fortune, with plans to raise additional funds from like-minded philanthropists. We need a physical location, he told the foundation's newly hired executive director, Gabriela Morales, a former child welfare advocate with an MBA from Stanford. Somewhere accessible to the communities we want to serve. The South Bronx property would be perfect, Gabriela suggested, referring to an old factory building Thorne Enterprises had acquired years earlier for a development project that never materialized. It needs renovation, but it's large enough for all our planned services and centrally located. Blake made the decision on the spot. It's done. Transfer the property from Thorne Enterprises to the foundation at a nominal cost and start the renovation immediately. That evening, as they sat at the kitchen table doing homework, Hope looked up from her math workbook. Blake, are you in trouble because of me? The question caught him off guard. What makes you ask that? Hope fidgeted with her pencil. I heard Mrs. Sullivan talking on the phone. She said that lady, Victoria, is trying to hurt you in the newspapers because of me. Blake set down the foundation proposal he'd been reviewing. Hope, listen to me. Victoria is angry because I broke up with her. That has nothing to do with you. But you broke up with her because she was mean to me, Hope persisted, her perceptiveness sometimes catching Blake by surprise. I broke up with her because she showed me who she really was, Blake explained carefully. You were just there when it happened. But even if it was because of you, which it wasn't, that would be my choice, and I don't regret it for a second. Hope considered this, her small face solemn. The kids at school say their parents say you went crazy. Blake couldn't help but laugh. Well, from their perspective, maybe I did. I stopped caring about the things they think are important and started caring about things that actually matter. Hope seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her multiplication tables. Blake watched her, marveling at her resilience. Despite everything she'd endured, she approached each day with quiet determination and increasingly frequent moments of childlike joy. The following week brought a new complication. Blake was in a meeting at Thorne Enterprises when his assistant interrupted with an urgent call from Henderson. The butler. Sir, there's a woman here claiming to be Hope's aunt, Henderson reported, his usual composure slightly rattled. She's quite insistent on seeing the child. Blake's heart raced. Don't let her near Hope, I'm on my way. He arrived home to find a woman in her mid-30s pacing the foyer. She was dressed neatly but inexpensively, her resemblance to Hope unmistakable in the shape of her eyes and the curve of her cheek. Mr. Thorne, she said when Blake entered, her accent thicker than Hope's but her English fluent. I am Lucia Martinez, Esperanza's maternal aunt. I've been searching for her for months. Can you prove this? Blake asked, his protective instincts on high alert. She opened her purse and extracted a worn family photo showing a younger version of herself with a woman who must have been Hope's mother, their arms around each other, laughing at the camera. This is my sister, Elena. Hope looks just like her. The resemblance was striking. How did you find her here? Blake asked. I've been working with a community organization in Hartford to trace her after the fire, Lucia explained. Last week, someone from the Salvadoran community in Stamford mentioned a little girl named Esperanza, who'd been taken in by a wealthy man in Greenwich. It took some time to find your address, Blake gestured toward the sitting room. Please, Ms. Martinez, let's talk. Over the next hour, Lucia explained that she had been living in Hartford when the apartment fire claimed her sister's life. She had been unaware that Hope had been placed in a shelter rather than foster care, and had been searching for her niece ever since. She had a modest apartment, a steady job as a medical assistant and legal residency. "I want to thank you for taking care of her," Lucia said, emotion evident in her voice. "But she belongs with family, with someone who can keep her connected to her mother's memory, her language, her culture." Blake felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him. Logically, he knew that a blood relative with a stable situation would likely be considered Hope's best placement by any court or social service agency. Emotionally, the thought of losing her was devastating. "Hope has been through tremendous trauma," Blake said carefully. "She's just starting to feel secure again. Any transition needs to be handled with extreme care." "Of course," Lucia agreed readily. "I would never want to traumatize her further. But Mr. Thorne, she is my niece, my own blood. Surely you understand I cannot simply walk away now that I've found her." "I understand," Blake said, his throat tight. "But I need to verify your identity and relationship before introducing you to Hope. I hope you can respect that I'm trying to protect her." Lucia nodded. "I expected nothing less. I have brought my identification, and I can provide contact information for the organization that helped me search for Esperanza." "Thank you," Blake said. "If everything checks out, we can discuss the best way to tell Hope and arrange a meeting." After Lucia left, Blake called his lawyer, who immediately began the process of verifying her identity and relationship to Hope. He also called Dr. Jensen, Hope's psychologist, for advice on how to handle the situation. If this woman is indeed Hope's aunt, with a stable situation and genuine desire to care for her, the courts would likely favor placement with her. Dr. Jensen confirmed what Blake already knew. However, Hope's wishes would also be taken into consideration, especially given her age and the bond she's formed with you. "What's best for Hope?" Blake asked, the question that had become his North Star. "That's complex," Dr. Jensen replied thoughtfully. "Family connections are powerful and important, especially connections to her mother and culture, but stability and attachment are equally crucial after what she's been through. The ideal scenario might be maintaining both relationships, her aunt as family, and you as a supportive presence in her life." When Hope returned from school, Blake maintained his usual routine, not wanting to disturb her with the news until he had verified Lucia's claims. They had dinner, worked on homework, and read together before bedtime. Ordinary moments that Blake now realized were precious beyond measure. Later that night, he sat alone in his study, contemplating the possibility of losing Hope. He had known from the beginning that his guardianship might be temporary, that Hope might have family searching for her. He had told himself he was prepared for that possibility. He had been lying to himself. In just a few short months, Hope had become the center of his world, reshaping his priorities and opening his heart in ways he hadn't thought possible. The prospect of her leaving felt like a physical pain. His phone chimed with an email from his lawyer. Preliminary verification confirmed Lucia Martinez was indeed Hope's maternal aunt, with documentation to prove it. Blake poured himself 2 fingers of bourbon and walked to the window. The grounds of his estate stretched before him, manicured and perfect, representing the success he had pursued so single-mindedly for years. It all seemed hollow now, compared to the simple joy of helping Hope with her spelling words or watching her play with Chance in the garden. Whatever happened next, Blake knew one thing with absolute certainty. Hope's well-being came first, even if that meant letting her go. The thought nearly broke him, but it also clarified everything. This was what real love meant, putting someone else's needs above your own desires, your own comfort, your own heart. This was the lesson Hope had taught him without ever intending to. And it was a lesson he wouldn't forget, no matter what the future held. The following morning, Blake took the unusual step of cancelling all his meetings, instead driving Hope to school himself. Each moment with her now felt weighted with extra significance, knowing that their time together might be limited. "You're quiet today," Hope observed as they approached the school gates. "Are you sad about something?" Blake forced a smile. "Just thinking." "Have a good day, okay? I'll pick you up this afternoon." "You promise?" Hope asked, her usual question before parting. "I promise." The words caught in his throat. After dropping her off, Blake met with his lawyer to discuss Lucia's claim. All verification had checked out. She was indeed Elena Martinez's sister, Hope's maternal aunt with a stable job and housing situation. She had been searching for Hope since the fire, hampered by bureaucratic obstacles and miscommunication among various agencies. Legally speaking, she has a strong claim, his lawyer explained. Blood relation, stable situation, no criminal record, legal residency status. Any family court would look favorably on her petition for guardianship. What are my options? Blake asked. You could contest it, argue that disrupting Hope's current stable placement would be harmful to her. Given your resources, you could make it a lengthy legal battle. The lawyer hesitated. But I have to advise you, Mr. Thorne, that unless Ms. Martinez is found unfit, which doesn't appear to be the case, the courts will likely favor placement with a biological relative. And if Hope doesn't want to go with her? The court would consider her wishes, particularly given her age. But they would weigh that against many factors, including the value of maintaining family and cultural connections. Blake nodded, having expected as much. Set up a meeting with Ms. Martinez here at the house tomorrow afternoon and arrange for Hope's psychologist to be present. That evening, after much consultation with Dr. Jensen, Blake sat Hope down in the garden, her favorite spot on the property. Hope, I need to tell you something important, he began gently. Someone has been looking for you since the fire. Your mother's sister, your Aunt Lucia. Hope's eyes widened. Dear Lucia, from Hartford. Yes, Blake confirmed, surprised. You remember her? Hope nodded. She used to visit sometimes. She gave me a doll for Christmas once. Her expression clouded. After the fire, the lady from social services said they couldn't find her. Well, she's been looking for you all this time, Blake explained. And she's found you now. She wants to see you. Hope processed this silently, her emotions passing across her face like clouds, surprise, confusion, hope, anxiety. Does that mean I have to leave? The question pierced Blake's heart. No decisions have been made, he said carefully. She's coming here tomorrow so you can see each other. Dr. Jensen will be here too to help with the conversation. Will you be there? Hope asked, her voice small. Every minute, Blake promised. We'll figure this out together. The next day, Lucia arrived exactly on time, carrying a small gift bag and visibly nervous. Dr. Jensen had already reviewed the situation with her, emphasizing the need for patience and sensitivity to Hope's feelings. When Hope entered the living room with Blake, she stopped short, staring at her aunt. Lucia gasped softly, one hand rising to cover her mouth. Esperanza, she whispered. Mi niña. Hope took a hesitant step forward. Dear Lucia. What followed was an emotional reunion conducted partly in English, partly in Spanish, with Lucia alternately laughing and crying as she embraced the niece she had feared lost forever. Hope was reserved at first, but gradually warmed as Lucia shared memories of her mother, pulling out a small photo album she had brought. Look, this was your mama when she was just a little older than you, Lucia said, pointing to a school photo. You have her smile exactly the same. Hope traced the image with her finger. I was forgetting what she looked like, she admitted quietly. Blake watched from a respectful distance, his heart both full and breaking. The family resemblance was unmistakable, the connection evident. This was Hope's blood, her heritage, her link to the mother she had lost. After an hour of carefully monitored conversation, Dr. Jensen suggested that Hope show Lucia her room while the adults talked. Once they were alone, the psychologist turned to Blake. This is going well, she observed. Hope clearly remembers her aunt positively. What happens now? Blake asked. That depends on what you and Ms. Martinez decide is best for Hope, Dr. Jensen replied. There are many possibilities here, not all of them binary. When Lucia returned, Hope had gone to the kitchen with Mrs. Sullivan for a snack. Giving the adults time to talk, she seems happy here, Lucia acknowledged, her expression complex. You've given her so much. She's given me more, Blake replied honestly. Mr. Thorne, I want to be clear. I am Esperanza's only living relative. I love her, and I have a legal right to care for her. Lucia's voice was firm despite her evident nervousness at confronting a man of Blake's wealth and power. But I am not a wealthy woman. I cannot give her the material things you can provide. This isn't about money, Blake said. No, it is not, Lucia agreed. It is about family, about keeping her connected to her mother's memory, to her culture, to her roots. These are things I can give her that you cannot, with all your millions. Blake nodded, unable to argue. You're right. Those things are invaluable. Lucia seemed surprised by his agreement. Then you understand why she should live with me? I understand why she needs you in her life, Blake clarified. Whether that means living with you full-time is something we should consider carefully, with Hope's best interests as the priority. Dr. Jensen intervened gently. Perhaps we could discuss arrangements that would allow Hope to maintain connections with both of you. Children benefit from having multiple loving adults in their lives, especially after trauma. Over the next hour, they explored various possibilities. Hope living with Lucia, but visiting Blake regularly. Hope remaining with Blake, but spending weekends and vacations with Lucia. Joint guardianship arrangements. Support for Lucia to relocate closer to Greenwich to facilitate more frequent contact. I cannot move to Greenwich, Lucia said firmly. I could never afford to live here even with help. And I would not be comfortable being dependent on Mr. Thorne's charity. What about Stamford? Blake suggested. It's more affordable but still close. I could help you find a good apartment there, not as charity, but as an investment in Hope's well-being. And my job in Hartford? Lucia asked practically. There are several excellent hospitals and medical facilities in Stamford, Blake pointed out. With your qualifications, finding a position shouldn't be difficult. Lucia considered this, clearly torn between her pride and the practical benefits of the arrangement. I would need to think about this. And most importantly, we need to consider what Esperanza wants. Absolutely, Blake agreed immediately. Hope's feelings are paramount. When Hope returned, they explained the options they had discussed in age-appropriate terms, emphasizing that she had time to think and that everyone's priority was her happiness and well-being. So I could still live with Blake but see Tia Lucia a lot? Hope asked, trying to understand. That's one possibility, Dr. Jensen confirmed. Or you could live with your aunt but still see Blake often. Hope looked between the adults, the weight of the choice evident on her small face. Can I think about it? Of course, Blake assured her. There's no rush to decide anything today. In the days that followed, Hope spent more time with Lucia, who took a week off work to stay in a hotel near Greenwich. They went to the park together, cooked traditional Salvadoran foods and looked through family photos. Hope began teaching Blake the Spanish words and phrases they used, bringing him into their shared world. One evening, after Lucia had returned to her hotel, Hope found Blake in his study, looking over foundation plans. Blake? She asked, hovering in the doorway. Can I talk to you? Always. Blake set aside his papers, giving her his full attention. Hope climbed into the leather chair opposite his desk, her feet dangling above the floor. I've been thinking about living with Tia Lucia. Blake steeled himself for what was coming. What are your thoughts? I love her, Hope said simply. She tells me stories about Mama that I didn't remember. And she makes pupusas just like Mama did. That's wonderful, Blake said, his throat tight but his voice steady. But, Hope hesitated. But what, sweetheart? I love you too, she said, her eyes filling with tears. And Chance and Mrs. Sullivan and my school and my room. Her voice broke. I don't want to lose anyone else. Blake moved around the desk and knelt before her chair, taking her small hands in his. Hope, listen to me. You won't lose me ever, no matter what happens or where you live. I promise you that. Could Tia Lucia live here? Hope asked hopefully. This house is so big. Blake had actually considered this possibility, but Lucia had made it clear she valued her independence. I don't think that would work for your aunt. But what if she lived nearby, close enough that you could see her whenever you wanted? Hope's face brightened. Like in Stamford? She said she liked Stamford. Exactly, Blake confirmed. And what if for now you kept living here with me, but spent lots of time with Lucia? Weekends, some afternoons after school, vacations? And then, after some time, if you wanted to change the arrangement, we could talk about that. Hope considered this seriously. Would Tia Lucia be okay with that? I think she might be, Blake said. She loves you very much and wants what makes you happy, just like I do. The next day, Blake met with Lucia while Hope was at school, laying out the proposed arrangement. I've found an excellent apartment in a good neighborhood in Stamford, about 20 minutes from here. It's a two-bedroom, so Hope would have her own room for visits. I've also spoken with the chief of medicine at Stamford Hospital. They have an opening in the outpatient clinic that would be perfect for your qualifications, with better pay and benefits than your current position. Lucia eyed him suspiciously. You've arranged all this already? I've explored the possibilities, Blake corrected. Nothing is finalized without your agreement. The apartment would be in your name, not mine. The job interview would be based on your merits, though I admit I made sure your resume received proper attention. And Hope? She's expressed that she'd like to continue living here primarily, but with frequent visits with you. For now, at least. As she adjusts as you both build your relationship, that arrangement could evolve. Lucia was quiet for a long moment. I want to be clear, Mr. Thorne. I am not giving up my rights to my niece. I am her family. I would never ask you to, Blake assured her. In fact, I'd like to formalize a shared guardianship arrangement, legally recognizing both our roles in Hope's life. You would share guardianship? Lucia seemed surprised. Most men in your position would use their money and power to take full control. I'm not interested in control, Blake said simply. I'm interested in Hope's happiness. And she needs both of us. Lucia studied him with new eyes. Perhaps I have misjudged you, Mr. Thorne. Please call me Blake. Blake, she acknowledged with a small nod. I will consider your proposal, but I will need to see this apartment, interview for this job myself, and most importantly, discuss it further with Esperanza. Of course, Blake agreed. All I ask is that we work together, with Hope's well-being as our shared goal. As Lucia left, Blake felt a tentative hope blossoming. Perhaps there was a path forward that would allow Hope to maintain connections to both her past and her future, to her blood family and to the family she had found in an unexpected place. Perhaps love wasn't a zero-sum game after all, but something that could expand to encompass all the complicated relationships that made up a life. That night, as he tucked Hope into bed, she asked the question she had been circling around. If I stay living with you and Tia Lucia lives in Stamford, does that mean you'd still want to adopt me? Like you said before. Blake's heart swelled. Is that something you'd still want? Hope nodded solemnly. Could I have two last names? Martinez Thorne. So I still have my mama's name too. I think that sounds perfect, Blake said, his voice rough with emotion. And could Tia Lucia be at the adoption? So she knows I'm not leaving her out. Of course, Blake assured her. She'll always be your family, Hope. Nothing will change that. Hope smiled, the first full, unguarded smile he had seen since Lucia's appearance. I think I'd like that, she said, to be a Martinez Thorne. As Blake turned out the light, leaving the door cracked open the way Hope preferred, he felt a peace settle over him. The path forward wouldn't be simple. There would be legal complications, adjustments, probably disagreements with Lucia as they navigated their shared role in Hope's life. But for the first time, he could see a future where Hope was surrounded by all the love she deserved, from all directions, and in that moment, it felt like enough. 6 months later, on a bright spring morning, the newly renovated Esperanza Foundation Center opened its doors in the South Bronx. The former factory had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space filled with natural light, vibrant murals, and functional areas designed to serve families in crisis. There were private counseling rooms, a legal aid center, classrooms for educational programs, a daycare facility, and temporary housing units for families in transition. Blake stood in the atrium, watching as staff prepared for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The foundation had grown beyond his initial vision, now employing over 50 people with expertise ranging from social work to immigration law, from education to trauma counseling. The endowment had doubled as other wealthy donors, inspired by Blake's personal commitment, joined the cause. Nervous? Robert asked, joining him by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked a newly created playground. A little, Blake admitted. It's different from opening a luxury high-rise. Better different, Robert observed, though the board at Thorne Enterprises might not agree. The past 6 months had brought significant changes to Blake's professional life. As he devoted more time to the foundation and to Hope, he had gradually stepped back from day-to-day operations at Thorne Enterprises, promoting Robert to Chief Operating Officer, and delegating many responsibilities he had previously insisted on handling personally. The company's board of directors had been initially resistant, concerned about the potential impact on their stock price and Blake's apparent distraction. Victoria's threatened lawsuit had materialized, though it had been settled quickly and quietly once Blake's lawyers made it clear he was prepared for a public battle, something Victoria, despite her threats, ultimately wanted to avoid. The larger business community had been divided in their reaction to Blake's evolution. Some saw it as a midlife crisis that would eventually pass. Others recognized it as a genuine shift in priorities that reflected broader changes in societal expectations of wealthy business leaders. "The board will adapt," Blake said confidently. "Our profits are up, our projects are on schedule, and our reputation is stronger than ever among the demographics that actually matter for our future growth." Robert smiled. "Listen to you, still thinking strategically. Maybe you haven't changed as much as people think." "Oh, I've changed," Blake countered. "I just haven't forgotten everything I've learned." A commotion at the entrance caught their attention. Hope had arrived with Lucia, both dressed in coordinating outfits for the ceremony. Over the past months, they had settled into a rhythm that seemed to work for everyone. Hope lived primarily with Blake, but spent every weekend with Lucia in her Stamford apartment. They shared holidays, school events, and regular family dinners. It hadn't been without challenges. There had been disagreements about Hope's education, religious upbringing, and cultural experiences. Lucia, while grateful for Blake's support, remained fiercely independent and sometimes bristled at what she perceived as his tendency to solve problems with money rather than understanding. Blake, in turn, had to learn to share decision-making with someone whose life experiences and priorities were very different from his own. But through it all, they had maintained their commitment to putting Hope first, and she had flourished under their shared care. Her academic performance had improved dramatically. She had made several close friends at school, and most importantly, the haunted look that had once shadowed her eyes had been replaced by a confident sparkle. "Blake!" Hope called, spotting him across the atrium. She ran toward him, a streak of energy in a yellow dress, her dark hair now grown long enough for the braids she preferred. "Do you like my outfit? Tia Lucia made it special for today." "You look beautiful," Blake assured her, accepting her enthusiastic hug. "Both of you do." Lucia approached more sedately, elegant in a matching yellow dress with traditional Salvadoran embroidery. "The place looks amazing, Blake. Elena would be so proud to see her daughter's name on something so meaningful." The three of them had developed a careful friendship, bound by their love for Hope, and strengthened by the shared experience of creating something that honored the memory of Hope's mother. Lucia had become increasingly involved with the foundation, first as a cultural consultant, and eventually joining the board to ensure the programs remained sensitive to the needs and perspectives of the communities they served. "It's almost time," Gabriela Morales, the foundation's executive director, announced. "The press is assembled outside and the families are arriving for the tour." Blake nodded, suddenly feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a building or a program. It was the physical manifestation of the transformation that had begun that day in his garden when he witnessed Victoria's cruelty and Hope's vulnerability. "Places, everyone," Gabriela directed, ushering them toward the main entrance where a red ribbon stretched across the doorway. Outside, a crowd had gathered, staff members, community leaders, politicians, media, and most importantly, families who would benefit from the foundation's services. Blake was scheduled to give a speech, something he had done countless times for property openings and business achievements. But this felt different, more meaningful, yet also more daunting. "You'll do great," Hope whispered, somehow sensing his nervousness. "Just speak from your heart, like you told me to do for my school presentation." Blake smiled down at her, marveling at how this child had become his teacher in so many ways. "Wise advice." Gabriela introduced him with a brief overview of the Foundation's mission and Blake's role in creating it. As he stepped up to the microphone, he set aside his prepared remarks, deciding instead to follow Hope's advice. 6 months ago, a child came into my life by chance, or perhaps by destiny," he began, his gaze finding Hope in the front row. She was hungry, alone, and afraid. The system designed to protect her had failed, but her courage in the face of adversity humbled me and opened my eyes to a reality I had chosen not to see. He paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. Many of us in positions of privilege build walls around ourselves, literal and figurative, to separate us from the suffering of others. We convince ourselves that success is measured by what we accumulate rather than by what we contribute. We tell ourselves that the problems of the disadvantaged are not our concern. I was guilty of all of these things, Blake continued, his voice steady but emotional. But through one child's eyes, I was forced to confront the person I had become and the world I had accepted. The Esperanza Foundation, the Hope Foundation, is not charity. It is an investment in our shared humanity, in the belief that every child deserves safety, opportunity, and dignity. He outlined the Foundation's programs: immediate crisis intervention for homeless families, legal support for immigration issues, educational resources, mental health services, and advocacy for systemic change. But buildings and programs are just the beginning, he emphasized. Real change happens person by person, heart by heart. As he concluded his remarks, Blake invited Hope to join him at the ribbon. The foundation bears her name, Esperanza, Hope, because that's what she gave me and what we hope to give others. It seems fitting that she should be the one to officially open these doors. Hope approached the ribbon, her expression solemn with the importance of the moment. Lucia joined them, and together the three of them, an unlikely family formed through circumstance and choice, cut the ribbon that symbolized new beginnings. As the crowd applauded and the doors swung wide, Blake was struck by how far they had come from that fateful afternoon in his garden. Victoria had disappeared from his life, retreating to Europe after the settlement, with a final barbed comment to the press about his midlife crisis charity project. Most of their social circle had drifted away, unwilling or unable to understand the changes in his priorities and lifestyle. But new relationships had formed, with the foundation staff who shared his vision, with the families they served who taught him daily lessons in resilience and dignity, with Lucia, whose fierce love for Hope had expanded to include a grudging respect for him, and most profoundly, with Hope herself, whose legal adoption was now proceeding with Lucia's blessing and participation. The first families began entering the center, their faces a mixture of hope and wariness as they were welcomed by staff. Blake stood back, watching as Hope excitedly showed several children the play area she had helped design. "You've created something remarkable here," a voice said beside him. He turned to find Sarah Jensen, Hope's psychologist, observing the scene with approval. "We've only just begun," Blake replied. "There's so much more to do." "True," Dr. Jensen acknowledged. "But don't forget to appreciate how far you've come." Both the foundation and Hope. As if hearing her name, Hope looked up from across the room and waved excitedly at Blake, her face alight with joy. She turned to say something to Lucia, then ran over to them. "Blake! Tia Lucia says we can take some of the families for ice cream after the tour." "Can we, please?" "That sounds perfect," Blake agreed, his heart full. "And Dr. Jensen, you'll come too, right?" Hope continued, her excitement bubbling over. "I want to introduce you to my new friend, Maria. She just came from El Salvador, like my mama did, and she's nervous about starting school here. But I told her you helped me when I was scared, and maybe you could talk to her too." Dr. Jensen smiled. "I'd be honored, Hope." Hope beamed, then spotted someone else she wanted to greet, and dashed off with the boundless energy of childhood, leaving the adults watching her with shared affection. "Sometimes I can hardly believe she's the same frightened child I met that first day," Blake mused. "Children are remarkably resilient when given the right support," Dr. Jensen observed, "and Hope has had that in abundance, from you, from Lucia, from this entire community you've built around her." The afternoon unfolded in a blur of tours, conversations, and media interviews. Blake found himself increasingly stepping back, allowing Gabriella and her team to take the lead, while he observed the impact of what they had created. Each family that walked through the doors represented both a failure of existing systems and an opportunity for transformation. As the formal events concluded, Blake, Hope, and Lucia followed through on their ice cream promise, taking several families to a local shop that had partnered with the foundation to provide job training for parents. Sitting at a table surrounded by children's laughter, Blake caught Lucia's eye across the chaos. "Thank you," he said simply. She understood, without explanation. We both gave her what she needed. Different things, but equally important. Later that evening, back at the Greenwich mansion, which felt increasingly oversized and formal compared to the vibrant community spaces they had created at the foundation, Blake sat with Hope in what had become their nightly ritual. She read aloud from her current book while he listened, occasionally helping with difficult words, but mostly just treasuring the moment. "Blake," she asked, setting down her book, "are you happy that Lady was mean to me in the garden that day?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "Well," Hope said thoughtfully, "if she hadn't been so mean, you wouldn't have helped me. And if you hadn't helped me, we wouldn't have found Tia Lucia again. And we wouldn't have made the foundation to help other kids. So even though it was bad then, maybe it was good too." Blake considered this carefully. "I'm never happy when anyone is cruel, especially to a child. But I'm grateful for everything that happened afterward, finding you, helping you reunite with your aunt, creating the foundation. Sometimes difficult moments can lead to beautiful changes, if we let them." Hope nodded, satisfied with this answer. "That's what I thought. Mrs. Reynolds at school says it's called a blessing in disguise." "That's a good way to put it," Blake agreed. "I have homework to finish," Hope announced, sliding off the couch. At the doorway she paused. "Blake, I'm glad you're my dad now, and I'm glad Tia Lucia is my aunt. I think Mama would be happy about that." "I think so too," Blake said softly. Alone in the quiet room, Blake reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. He had lost some things along the way: the comfortable insularity of wealth, certain business opportunities, social connections that had once seemed important. But what he had gained was immeasurable: purpose, perspective, and a love that asked nothing in return except to be given freely to others. The following week would bring the final adoption hearing, where Hope would legally become Esperanza Martinez Thorne. The judge had already indicated approval, impressed by the unusual but effective co-parenting arrangement Blake and Lucia had established. Hope would continue her current living arrangement, with Blake as her primary residence and Lucia as an integral part of her daily life. The phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Gabriella, calling with news that the foundation had been selected for a major grant that would allow them to expand their programs to 2 additional locations. Blake congratulated her, confirmed a meeting for the following day to discuss details, and then smiled as he hung up. The foundation was taking on a life of its own, growing beyond his initial vision in ways he couldn't have anticipated. Outside, the spring evening was settling into twilight. The grounds of his estate bathed in soft golden light. Blake walked to the window, remembering the man he had been not so long ago, successful by every external measure yet somehow hollow at the core. That man would never have imagined finding fulfillment in a child's smile, in a community's transformation, in the simple act of being needed for something beyond his wealth or influence. Hope had asked once why he had named the foundation after her. "Because you gave me hope when I didn't even know I needed it," he had told her. It was true but incomplete. She had given him more than hope. She had given him a new vision of what success could mean, of what truly mattered in a life well lived. From upstairs came the sound of Hope practicing her Spanish with the video call app they used for daily check-ins with Lucia on the evenings they weren't together. Her laughter floated down the hallway, the sound of a child secure in the knowledge that she was loved, protected and valued. It was, Blake reflected, the most beautiful sound in the world, and one that every child deserved to experience. That mission, far more than any building or business deal, would be his legacy. And it had all begun with a hungry child, a sandwich, and the courage to see beyond the walls he had built around his heart.